Hello and welcome to ThePrint. Prime Minister Narendra Modi would be completing his historic visit to Ukraine after visiting Poland just this evening. And what we've seen from the takeaways of this important visit is that a joint statement has been issued by Modi and the Ukrainian president, as well as a discussion that went on for 3 hours, in which, of course, the conflict on the Ukrainian battlefield was the main topic. Apart from that, there was also a confirmation by External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, who held a press briefing after this, confirming that Modi had delivered a message to Ukrainian president about Russia's concerns as well. Now, to unpack the importance of this visit and, of course, the quick news that we're getting in right now, I have two highly knowledgeable experts on this topic to unpack it. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at the Europe Eurasia Center at IDSA, and Yusuf Unjhawala, Adjunct Scholar at the Takshashila Institution. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Yeah, pleasure, Priya.
Swasti, I'll begin with you. What do you see are the three main takeaways of this historic visit by PM Modi to Ukraine?
So pleasure to be there with you, Priya, and great to see Yusuf. I think he wrote a very brilliant piece recently on ThePrint on the relevance of Ukraine, especially in defense industry. So yeah, the three major takeaways. Well, the first thing is that the first major takeaway is the visit itself, because it is unprecedented for an Indian Prime Minister to actually travel by train, 10 hours by train to go to a country where air sirens are raging, which is an active war zone, and to actually go there not only by himself, but with the Foreign Affairs Minister, with the National Security Advisor, with the MEA, speaker, etc., etc. So that really shows that Modi had put a lot of premium on this particular visit and the optics and substance of it in both ways. So the first key takeaway is the visit itself. I think there's no way that we can take it away from the two sides. That's one. The second thing is the 4 written agreements that we saw. Well, I never really imagined too much coming out of this, because like I've been mentioning for a while now, that even though Ukraine, India have very important technical military cooperation going, but after the war, you see a little shift in that particular domain, which is that most of the information around it actually went classified, and it remains like that, and for obvious reasons. So I had maintained from the beginning that even though there would be the technical military cooperation would continue, but you would not see that being discussed or perhaps shared, especially by way of pressers and the joint statement, etc. So I'm not surprised there. With respect to the 4 agreements, of course, there's one on community development, on medicines, on agriculture, and cultural exchange, etc. That's fine. That's symbolic, but it's still there. I think I was very happy to see that the Foreign Affairs Minister actually mentioned about 17 consignments of humanitarian aid and all that. So that kind of reinforces the fact that India is indeed serious about its image and its task, its function as a humanitarian actor in this entire conflict. And the third probably takeaway would be that relay of messaging, which we were speaking about earlier, which is that I think it was expected from India to be the bridge between the two sides, and not just the two warring sides, but also, between Russia on the one hand and West on the other hand. So I think India must have sort of passed on the message about this not being the era for war, and what really should be done to bring the war to an end, even if the time is not right for a total mediation right now. But eventually the time will get, we will get close to that point. And whenever that point comes close, I think India would be much sought after. So those would be my 3 key takeaways.
And Yusuf, if I could come to you, in the press briefing delivered by External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, he mentioned that the Ukrainian side raised their concerns about India's imports of Russian oil. There was also conversations on food insecurity and, of course, how the conflict has affected the global South. What, according to you, is the biggest geostrategic takeaway from this?
Geostrategic takeaway in this regard, I think, is the war itself, the closure of the war. What I took from the foreign minister's press statement was him saying that not only is India participating in the global summit, but they're also looking at options outside of it. I thought that kind of gave a hint that there may have been discussions in India taking some kind of a bigger role in facilitating an end to this conflict. And then you link it with Prime Minister's visit to Moscow, and then certain messages being relayed over here. It may be the beginning of some kind of a more bigger involvement, or critical involvement from India's side to end this conflict. This is very early days, but this is what it seems, because Mr. Jaishankar was very clear, although he went all around the place, trying to be as diplomatic as possible instead of directly saying that, yes, messages were conveyed. But I think put together with him saying that we are also looking at solutions outside of the global summit, and also, spending greater part of the 3-hour talk on the conflict itself, which is not surprising. But that kind of shows that India may be now looking at a more involved role.
Swasti, I wanted to ask you, of course, the main question ahead of this visit was, is this damage control, given the Western pushback after Modi's visit to Russia? And in fact, Donald Lu, a top official from the US State Department, was giving a testimony in front of the US Congress where he said the symbolism and timing of Modi's visit to Russia was disappointing. Do you think this visit was damage control in a way?
Well, I mean, there's a bit of strategic signaling there that you cannot really take away, Pia, to be honest. And I think that if you notice how India's summit, I mean, Modi-Moscow summit went ahead, which was the first day, the kind of garmjoshi and the kind of warmth that you saw on the first day. And then the attack on the children's hospital, and then how the body language and the statements by Prime Minister Modi kind of changed the next day, that really showed that India was is indeed concerned about its image as a humanitarian actor, and as an actor that stands committed to the cause of peace. And whatever happened there, whether it was pre-planned or whether it was spontaneous, there's something obviously that I do not know. But whatever happened did not really fall in place or fall in line with how the stand that India has taken and the stand that India has invested in. Okay, so like not many people know about, I'm glad that Foreign Affairs Minister mentioned that, which is India's humanitarian assistance and all the participation that India has done, okay, right from the early days of the war up till now. So those kind of things were not really conducive to what happened, which was very tragic in Moscow. And right after that, I think there were some approximations, there were some guesses being made about some sort of a balancing. So at the heart of it, yes, there is some balancing. I would not deny that. It is undeniable in my opinion. And also the other thing that I've been mentioning, Pia, which of course I analyze also in those terms, which is that, for a long time we have needed to dehyphenate our relationship, okay, between this bilateral relationship that we have with Russia and the bilateral relationship we have with Ukraine. Why I say this is because, well, technically speaking, Ukraine has always been important to us. Technically speaking, I mean, anybody who knows even a little bit of defense would know that all our frontline warships, most of our aircraft, most of our Russian helicopters, all of those things have Ukrainian engines. They have the gas turbine engines. I mean, Ukrainians have been playing a very important role in the upgrade of our transport aircraft, AN-32. So anyone that knows defense knows that Ukraine is very important to us. But the larger debate, if you see how it was shaping up, especially after the war, we were for a long time, it looked as if we were looking at the Russia-Ukraine war with the lens of India-Russia bilateral ties. And that was really coming in the way of India having an independent approach and independent understanding of what role it can play, both bilaterally with Ukraine and also in the larger stabilization of the European order and the European theater. So this dehyphenation that has finally happened, see, this dehyphenation was there. You can perhaps change the level of analysis and argue that, yeah, but this was already there. The strategic autonomy was already there. I would say that, yes, it was already there, but it was somewhere in the background because that was not how the narrative was. Okay. And what the Prime Minister's visit has done, Prime Minister's visit, along with, all the other power delegation, the members of the power delegation, that they have brought this dehyphenation, which is a very healthy dehyphenation, in the foreground of how India looks at its relationship with Russia on the one hand, and how India looks at its relationship, which is a multifaceted relationship, with Ukraine on the other hand. And I think this particular shift is going to go a long way in India's role. Like I said, not just in stabilizing the situation in Ukraine, but also playing a more discernible role in the stabilization of the larger European order.
Yusuf, I'm glad that Swasti brought up the point about Indian warships and the critical role that the Ukrainian defense industry has also played in that. And I know you wrote a fabulous piece for ThePrint on Ukraine-India defense manufacturing and joint initiatives in that space. Now, how exactly, of course, we know that agreements on defense are not going to come to the fore, even with a landmark visit like this, but having written that piece, now you've seen Modi's visit to Ukraine. How is India going to balance that defense relationship with Ukraine, given it has been a traditional partner of Moscow, given it has this larger balancing act at play?
Like you said, such deals are not going to be announced. I was actually looking forward. I don't know. We have not read the complete joint statement. The EAM did not mention any defense-related things at all. So we'll have to see if the word defense is mentioned at all in the joint statement. I think that's left. But my piece was more, forward-looking as to how India can leverage, the ties, because it's in our interest. You have 105 transport aircraft which had to be upgraded. If they are lying without the upgrades. We have had several crashes of the AN-32s. And also now we're kind of looking at junking all of those and, ordering new ones. And that's going to be a lot of money involved then. So it just makes sense that, we find a way where we can upgrade these planes. And because there is still a lot of service life left in those aircraft. Secondly, and the important point that I talked about was the Zoria marine engines, the naval engines. And, as Swasti mentioned, there are several frontline warships of India which use these engines, and that was bombed. Currently there are 2 frigates being manufactured in India, built in India, which are, need Zoria engines. A deal for 4 were signed, I think in 2016 for 4 frigates. 2 of them were those were Russian warships which Russia had already built and where they were lying, without engines, because after the takeover of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine obviously denied them the engines. Those warships were lying like waste. India picked those up, and then we used our relations with Ukraine to get 2 engines transferred to Russia. And now we are waiting for engines for a couple of warships that are going to be made in India. And since the factory was bombed, we don't know what's the status of those engines. Similarly, going forward, we will make more ships. Now we are completely dependent on American engines, which is LM2500. So this visit, I thought maybe we can start to look at defense cooperation. We'll see what the joint statement says or does not say. But going forward, once the relation is stabilized, overcoming some of the bitterness, if any, from the past on India's stance on this war, we'll have to see. But just can I come back on the PR aspect? I think it is very symbolic that the Prime Minister gave a very warm hug to Zelensky, and they have gone ahead and paid homage to the children's memorial, which is very, very symbolic, because last month when the PM visited Moscow, Russia bombed a hospital in Kyiv, which killed a number of children. And as Swasti mentioned, the next day the PM had to face some really tough, situation, the international backlash that was there, the bad press that was there. And, PM then said, you cannot, endorse murder of children. I mean, basically, he accused, President Putin of murdering children. And now to go to Ukraine and, go to a memorial, and, if you see one of the pictures over there, he has his arm around President Zelensky as if to console him as they watch the video or something being played of those children being killed. Very symbolic. Again, a lot of PR out there, and also kind of trying to, bridge any of those gaps that might have been there, between India and Ukraine, and come across as someone who understands their pain, We want to end the war. We've offered our services, our offices, I guess. I'll again say, as the minister mentioned, we're looking outside of the summit level as well, the global summit, and more at a trilateral of India, Ukraine, and Russia in terms of passing messages around.
Right. And as per the joint statement, the PM said that there is a need for sincere and practical steps to find solutions to peace, whereas there doesn't seem to be any specific proposals as yet. But if I could also come back, you had mentioned American engines, and that reminded me that our defense minister is in Washington today while this trip is happening in Ukraine. And this comes at a time when the Indian Defense Ministry is facing a delay, of deliveries from General Electric on engines for the LCA Mk1A. I just thought you might want to weigh in on that this is happening parallelly.
There are global supply chain issues. I think a lot have been made as something like Americans holding engines. I don't think it's in their favor to do so. Basically the defense ties will be over if that's the case, and if the relations will be over, if they hold engines. There are global supply chain issues. I mean, since the war started, even Russia has not been able to supply some of its committed weapons to India. The S-400 air defense system, they are behind schedule by 3-4 years now. We don't know if the ones that they are now revised deadline of 2026 is going to be met or not. Similarly, our frigates that we ordered from Russia are behind schedule. So there are certain global issues because all the supply chains are linked, with the US, completely blocking China out. A lot of components are out from there as well. So we don't know what the status is. I don't think it's US denial of or going slow on the jet engines. It's probably to do with supply chains.
Well, thank you on the defense part. I did want to pivot a little bit, and Swasti, I'll come to you for this. Reconstruction efforts was definitely something that even the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba had at the top of his agenda when he visited India earlier this year. And this is something the Ukrainians have been pushing for. India, as you mentioned, our image as a humanitarian assistance provider.
Humanitarian actor. Provider.
Actor.
Yes.
Provider, that is an important and critical image, and therefore reconstruction efforts in Ukraine seems to play in quite well with that. And even in the talks between Prime Minister Modi and the Ukrainian president, there was sort of a push from the Ukrainian side for India to participate in more of the global peace summits and the reconstruction efforts of Ukraine, and as Yusuf pointed out, even exploring avenues outside that summit. But I wanted your take on what this will do to improve, or rather to push along India's efforts in the recovery of Ukraine, the reconstruction of Ukraine, and how it's going to, in the larger balancing act, deliver that.
Right. So the first thing that we need to perhaps recognize and acknowledge is that India's role in the Ukraine war and India's role as an actor, which is humanitarian effort and peace building, is not really understood. So, for example, one of the things I already mentioned that when I was speaking earlier, but part of it is also because of the fact that India's neutrality is not understood either. Yeah, because India's neutrality is not a passive neutrality. It is a very active and evolving neutrality. And when I say evolving, of course, it means that it is mindful of the changes, mindful of the readjustments, and mindful of the reset, which is required as and when the world requires it to do. Okay, so this is a resilience and flexibility, which is the beauty of India's neutrality, that perhaps is not really appreciated, not really acknowledged. And the way to sort of understand that is that now, suddenly the Prime Minister has gone there, and suddenly Ukraine has become the flavor of the season, and we see so much of news coverage in Ukraine. But for the last 3 years, it's been 900 days of the war. I mean, what really did majority of our media cover? I mean, majority of the media was only covering, counting hours to Ukraine's defeat or something like that. So what I'm trying to say is that I think we should have paid more attention to just how active our neutrality has been, When I say that, what I mean is that there have been more than about 40 times that the two sides have actually interacted officially, whether it's through phone calls or meeting in person. There have been at least three high-level delegations from Ukraine to India. First, two were from the two deputy foreign ministers, both ladies, and of course, I met them both. And the third was from the foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba himself, when he came here in March, if I'm not wrong, or February earlier this year. And he was very, and all these three high-power delegations from Ukraine have always been very appreciative of India's efforts. So, and it's somewhere a kind of a shame that we ourselves don't discuss about it too much. Like, for example, there was so much coverage on how India did not sign on the joint communique after the Switzerland Peace Summit. But there was hardly any discussion on how consistent India has been in all the four collaborative peace summits, starting from Copenhagen to Jeddah to Malta, and then to Switzerland. In fact, the one at the Jeddah, where Shri Ajit Doval had participated, actually established working groups, and working groups were established around areas that could where you could improve the situation through tactical mediation. And I'll give you an example. So, for example, whether it's exchange of prisoners of war or about protection of these nuclear plants, demining, etc. And we probably should have had a more I would say a more substantive discourse on India's position, India's neutrality, the active element in India's neutrality. And I really sometimes now I think it's very satisfying to see that this particular angle is being acknowledged to the right degree. So now coming to your question about humanitarian effort, of course, I have no doubt in my mind that India is going to rise up to the occasion like it has always done. Okay, whenever there's been an international disaster or a tragedy or a war situation, and especially in the case of Ukraine, India has already sent 17 consignments of aid. And now we need to basically put together enabling frameworks. And by enabling frameworks, what do I mean? I mean specifically 2-3 things. One is that we have something called a line of credit system, right? I mean, this is how we sort of get into developmental activities, etc. So can we do that with Ukraine? If so, what would be the terms and conditions? That would be perhaps one kind of a brainstorming on enabling frameworks. The other could be the triangular, framework, where we actually join hands with another country. Most often than not, it's a European country to actually bring about developmental programs or tasks in developing nations. And in the case of Ukraine, it makes a lot of sense because ultimately our effort in the rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine is going to be embedded in the larger European approach to it, of course, because right now we are also in a global moment where our ties with the West are pretty unprecedentedly, doing well. So I think these are the kind of things that we should be speaking more, we should be discussing more. There should be more research on these kind of things, and because this is largely in India's interest, this has been the India's committed stand right from the beginning. And I think I'm just what do I say, that it took about 3 years for us to actually have this discussion, like a wholehearted discussion on just how committed India has remained from the go. Okay, despite all the narrative building, sometimes very uncomfortable narrative building, but this is what India really stands for, and this is why India is valued. I mean, I remember every single time when the Ukrainian delegation and the members came, they were just extremely hopeful about the role that India can play, and you see it echoing even now. So I think this is a very positive step. This is something that should continue, and I'm very hopeful on this front, actually.
As a journalist, I'm a little curious if lines of credit and humanitarian aid is enough. I mean, we've also seen, though this has not been specifically in the conflict zone, we've seen 69 Indian workers take up Palestinian jobs that were, removed in Israel. 69 Indian workers went to Israel and took up Palestinian jobs that had been lost. I mean, is there an option for us to set up some sort of mobility agreement? Is there some other way and other avenues that we should be exploring apart from financial aid?
Well, so very quickly, to your answer, see, the thing is that we also haven't really paid enough attention to all the Indian stories, the human stories that are now coming out from Ukraine, especially now that our media is there and they are really hunting down all the Indian businesses and all the Indian, people who are living in Ukraine, apart from the medical students, of course, who have done this glorious job of saving Ukrainian children in the war. So I think if you look carefully, and I was just going through certain coverage, news coverage on the Indian businessmen who are settled in Ukraine for many, many years, about 30 years or so. And if you see the approach that they have taken, you will see that they are right in the middle of the war and right in areas which are very frontline. So, for example, places like Sumy, which is merely a few kilometers away from where the war is happening, or Zaporizhia, you see that there's been a huge investment by Indian businessmen. Now, I know your question to me is that, do you expect some sort of a mobility agreement that Indian workers could go there? I don't think it could probably happen in the middle of the war. But what I do feel is that there is an opportunity of investment that will, that will open later. And like I said, that I think in this particular context, India perhaps would rather go in a more collaborative. India's approach towards that reconstruction would be embedded within the larger European approach. That's my hunch for now. If that changes later, I won't be surprised. And I'm actually looking, because it's an evolving thing. So though I am being very risk averse right now as I'm talking to you, but despite that, I think I would leave room for more speculation. And because I understand completely that it is an evolving situation, because let's acknowledge and accept that nobody really saw Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine coming. It is completely unprecedented and it's unimaginable. So nobody could have imagined, like 2 months ago, that Prime Minister could be visiting Ukraine with a high power delegation. So I think it's good to let it remain open-ended, because at the end of the day, I think India is becoming more and more mindful of its national interest. And I still agree with Yusuf that India's national interest is what is driving India to Ukraine, what drove India to Poland, and what will also determine India's engagements in the future. So I think that kind of vantage point is important at all times as to how do you set the tone of your analysis. And I think that's going to be India's national interest. And Ukraine is very important to India's national interest.
Yusuf, I'd like to conclude with you with sort of a broad question. I was reading C. Raja Mohan's piece in Indian Express about what this means for Central Europe in India's larger foreign policy. And I was just curious, how do you see this trip contributing to India's sort of collective diplomacy that we've been seeing in Europe over the last few years? Before, we would engage only with maybe Russia, France, Britain, and Germany to a degree. But what do you see as sort of the ripple effects of this visit to Ukraine on our larger foreign policy vis-a-vis Europe?
I think Poland has been a very important partner for us. We have historic ties. I mean, the PM has talked about it. It's also a very good manufacturing center, Poland, both in terms of civilian manufacturing as well as defense manufacturing. So I don't think we have to rule out even good kind of collaboration with Poland to get spares for, say, Russian equipment which is there in India. We are finding it very difficult to find spares for them. So there can be a big contribution from Poland. Can they help us, set up spares factory in India for Russian equipment? I mean, we can explore those. We have to think innovatively. I think that can be a great. So, some of the old tanks that we have, like T-72s, can we work with the Poles to get spares manufactured in India, understand some of the technology behind it, and maybe invite them for joint ventures if that's the way to work with. But broadly, Central Europe, obviously, it's taking center stage in our engagement with Europe. They are the population centers as well. Also, with the kind of recession that we're going to see in some of the Western European states, and some of the other factors, including their domestic politics. I think it just helps India to just broad base its engagement with Europe. We are looking at concluding a free trade agreement that has been in works for a very long time. We need that as well. So kind of builds up a broad consensus around working with India when we engage with all these states, which are also at the front line of Europe and NATO when it comes to Russia.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, Swasti, for taking the time out to speak to ThePrint on this very important visit. and we'll be tracking it, of course, going forward, as I'm sure you will too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Priya.
Bye-bye.